Welcome to Those Were the Days. I'm Nancy Martin, the library archivist. Today's topic is the Village of Venetia. As always, this program is not a comprehensive history, but a brief presentation that hits on a few key aspects of the community's history. There can be no discussion of the history of Venetia without talking about the Wright brothers, Joshua and James, who arrived in the area around 1772. There's very little agreement about dates in this early period, so you're going to hear a lot of abouts and arounds from me. The brothers acquired approximately 800 acres of land in southwestern PA. In 1779, James sold his land to his brother and headed to Kentucky, where he was killed by Native Americans around 1781. In the early 1780s, Joshua died, also at the hands of Native Americans, while en route to New Orleans by boat. Here's a copy of a portion of the Warrenty Township map of Peters Township held by the Pennsylvania State Archives. Warrenty Township maps show all original land grants from the Commonwealth made inside the boundaries of present-day townships. Information usually shown for each tract of land includes the name of the warrantee, name of patentee, number of acres, name of tract, which I love that they all had names, dates of warrant, survey, and patent numbers may also be given. I didn't know the difference between a land warrant and a land patent, so I had to look it up. A land warrant is a document that grants someone the right to claim a specific amount of land from the government. A land patent, on the other hand, is the official government document that transfers ownership of a specific piece of land to an individual. This particular warranty map shows the right holdings in Peters Township, outlined very roughly in red. It tells us that in 1788, 381 acres of land were granted via PA Warrant 12235 to John Hopkins, who was representing Joshua Wright's heirs. The parcel was called Egremont. I can only assume that John Hopkins was acting as a representative for Joshua's heirs due to his property's proximity to Joshua's properties. John Hopkins' property's double patent and the barley field can be seen here, outlined in yellow. Joshua's son Enoch Wright was born on March 10, 1776, on the family's Peters Township farm. He was only a young boy when his father died. Enoch served as Justice of the Peace for more than 30 years and also as County Commissioner and Director of the Poor. Enoch built what is now known as the Enoch Wright House on Venetia Road in 1815 to 1816. Len Maracini of the Peters Creek Historical Society was kind enough to give me a personal tour of the house just a couple of weeks ago. If you haven't already been to see it, I recommend that you check it out. You can find out about upcoming events and tours on the Society's website at peterscreekhistoricalsociety.org. The house was designed to be lived in by two families. It had a kitchen at each end of the house. The two sides of the house mirror each other's layout, with a shared central staircase and hall between them. The house was originally occupied by Enoch, his wife Rachel, and his mother on one side. Enoch and Rachel's only child, the later Reverend Joseph Wright, his wife Catherine, and their children lived on the other side of the house until about 1838. Enoch died in 1846 at the age of 70. He willed the house and land to his oldest grandson, Joshua Enoch Wright, who lived there until 1861. After that, the house became a rental property. In 1976, Hannah and Catherine Marvin, who had inherited the house, sold it and 1.4 acres of land to the Peters Creek Historical Society for $1. It now houses the Wright House Museum of Western Expansion, whose admirable mission, according to its website, is to preserve local history for future generations to enjoy. I don't know if you knew that the small brick building directly across Venetia Road from the Wright House that has been added onto and turned into a house was actually the Wright House's summer kitchen, where cooking took place during the summer months when it was too hot to use the indoor kitchens inside the house. One of those indoor kitchens can be seen here. One interesting story that Len shared was about Sarah Science. She was a young resident of the Washington County poorhouse who became an indentured servant to Enoch's family. Sarah earned her freedom when she reached the age of 18 in 1852. She married into the Atchison family and settled locally. Len told me she's buried in the Peters Creek Christian Church Cemetery at the intersection of Churchill and Sugar Camp Roads. The photo of her gravestone seen here was copied from findagrave.com. Also, here is a copy of Sarah's death certificate from 1926. She died at the age of 91 from influenza. I was saddened to see that senile debility was listed as a contributing factor in her death. I loved, however, that Sarah's profession is listed as, quote, retired housewife. A, I wasn't aware that was a job one could retire from, and B, I wonder what the pension's like. In 1823, Enoch and his wife Rachel donated the land and money to build a church and graveyard on Mingo Church Road near their home. The site of the chapel that was built can be seen in the top picture, and the chapel itself in the bottom one. A big thank you to Kathy for providing me with a copy of the bottom photograph. Enoch's son Joseph became a Methodist minister in 1835. In his 1851 will, he left the church to the Methodist denomination, granting permission to other Protestant denominations to use the space, provided their preacher was not a slaveholder or held pro-slavery views. A major storm on January 20th, 1854, severely damaged the church, which led to its eventually being torn down. More on that storm in a minute. The last service in the original Wrights Chapel was held on May 29th, 1922. Soon after, the building was razed. The current Wrights Church maintains the chapel cemetery. The much larger Wrights United Methodist Church we know today was then built at 788 Venetia Road across from the Wright House. It was dedicated in May of 1923. Getting back to the storm that damaged the first Wrights Chapel, I found an article from the January 27, 1854 edition of the Monongahela Valley Republican describing the storm, which it described as a, quote, terrible hurricane. Apparently, around 5 p.m. on Friday, January the 20th, this hurricane began cutting a path of destruction through the Peters Creek Valley. Houses were unroofed, a sawmill blown down, trees uprooted in a large orchard, stables blown down, and animals injured, including a large number of sheep. It was reported that on Enoch Wright's farm, a brick tenant house was entirely blown down. Happily, the family living in the house escaped without injury. In fact, no one was seriously injured by the storm. The paper observed, quote, the most remarkable feature of its fearful destruction is that not a man, woman, or child was seriously injured, although houses were unroofed, upset, and even completely torn down, with families residing in them. The whole valley is strewed with brick, shingles, house timbers, and trees, and presents a frightful picture of destruction and desolation. Venetia Road must have been a major construction zone in the early 1920s, because Venetia School opened near the new Wrights Church in 1926. The school is now owned and operated by the Venetia Heritage Society. The society will be celebrating the building's 100th anniversary in 2026. I know big plans are in the works. I also learned from watching Irma Grego's Venetia episode on her Senior Perspective program from the 1990s that there was once a time when, once a week, students at Venetia School walked to Wrights Church where they were served a hot lunch. Like Hackett, Venetia was home to multiple coal mines. Anderson Mine No. 1 in Venetia opened in 1880. By 1894, it employed 170 workers. Anderson Mine No. 2, known as the Eclipse Mine, was located on the former Wright family property. As Bob Moore mentioned in a previous meeting, Venetia was once known as Anderson Station. It was named for local mine owner and physician, Dr. David M. Anderson. Dr. Anderson, owner of the Anderson and Eclipse mines, was born in Beaver County, Pennsylvania in 1837 and died at his home in Venetia in 1903 at the age of 65. Anderson served in the Civil War and studied medicine in New York. Following his graduation, he moved to Peters Township and began to practice medicine alongside his brother-in-law, Dr. C.W. Townsend. Anderson married Charity Wright, the daughter of the Reverend Joseph Wright I mentioned earlier. Charles Townsend married Charity's sister, Margaret. The archives is lucky to have both a journal and a daybook belonging to Anderson. Here's a typical page of entries from his daybook, which covers the years 1874 to 1891. Anderson used the book to record the repayment of debts owed to him for the provision of medical services. Many of the payments were made in kind, with goods and services, rather than with cash. Here you can see that in October of 1874, Willie Anders paid back 62 cents by spending a day husking corn for Dr. Anderson. The journal and daybook have both been scanned and are available to view online on Pennsylvania Photos and Documents. Speaking of Dr. Charles W. Townsend, he was born in 1822 on his parents' Peters Township farm. He worked as a surveyor and later studied medicine, graduating from the Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia in 1849. He married Margaret Wright, daughter of the Reverend Joseph Wright, in 1854. He lived to the age of 88 and is buried in Wright's Chapel Cemetery. His gravestone can be seen here on the right. The grist mill seen here was built by Venetia resident John Swagler in the early 1860s. John, who lived from 1827 to 1902, was a mill owner, a farmer, and a sheep raiser. At the time of his death, his obituary was stated that, quote, he was one of the wealthiest citizens of Peters Township and had the reputation of growing fine wool. The tall building you can see behind the mill is McConaughey's General Store. The mill was first operated by horsepower, then by water power from Peters Creek, and finally by steam power. The mill was later owned and operated by John Swagler's son-in-law, R. Frank McConaughey. Frank married John's daughter, Emma. The old mill was torn down sometime between 1939 and 1940. The Archives is lucky enough to have a framed cornmeal sack from the mill at the time it was owned by Frank McConaughey. A post office was established in Venetia in 1880. It was originally located in the McCormick store. Leander, or Leonard McCormick, he seems to have been referred to by both names, lived in Venetia for more than 30 years. He was born in Peters Township in 1857 to James and Jane Wright McCormick. He taught at the Wright School in Peters Township and later operated a store and served as Venetia's first postmaster. The post office building seen here was built in the 1900s. Like many small communities, the residents of Venetia came together to help one another. On December 27, 1889, an entertainment was held in Wright's Church for the purpose of procuring artificial limbs for Elmer Scott, who, while attempting to jump from a freight train at Anderson Station in June of 1888, was, quote, thrown under the train and his legs so badly mangled that amputation was necessary. The Johnstown flood, which occurred on May 31, 1889, also had ties to Venetia. The Monongahela Valley Republican reported on June 20th that Beamer McConaughey, who had operated the Eclipse Mine Store for 2 years, was living in Johnstown at the time of the flood with his wife, their 2 children, and his sister-in-law, Milda Moore, who had once been a telegraph operator in Venetia. Beamer and his wife escaped the flood with their lives, but Milda and the 2 children, Harry and Frank, did not. The newspaper reported that Dr. Anderson of Venetia, who was a warm friend of Mr. McConaughey, spent several days at the wreck in the vain effort to find the bodies of the dead. Happily, it wasn't all work and tragedy for the residents of Venetia. Newspaper articles about the village's baseball team appear as early as 1897. During the 1930s, Venetia was one of 7 teams in the Peters Creek Baseball League. The league also included Snowden, Hill Station, Champion 3, Library, Gastonville, and Hackett. We talked about the Hackett Giants Baseball Club the month we discussed the Village of Hackett. Venetia was not without its scandals. In February of 1886, for example, it was reported that Maggie Rennie of Venetia felt that coal miner William Elkins had broken certain promises he had made to her. So she, quote, invoked the law, at which time William, quote, began to be lost. A warrant for Elkins was issued, and an Officer Massey began a keen hunt for the truant lover. He finally nabbed him at the O'Neill Pit Mine near Elizabeth, PA, and committed him to Hotel Grable, quote, to await a hearing for the seduction of Maggie Rennie. According to the last line of the article, at the hearing, he agreed to marry the girl. I did a little digging on Ancestry.com and turned up this consent form signed by Maggie's father, William, granting his permission for her to marry William Elkin. The 2 were married on February 19, 1886. Maggie was 19 and William 38 at the time of their marriage. In 1885, Venetia was booming. It was reported on December 9th of 1885 in Monongahela's The Daily Herald that, quote, business booms here, new houses going up, coal rattling lively, and everything alive in the metropolis of Peters Township. The article mentions multiple coal enterprises and new buildings going up and concludes with some fighting words aimed at nearby communities. It reads, quote, Venetia will begin to put on airs and make both Gastonville and Finleyville hide their diminished heads. Venetia's building boom continued into 1886 when it was reported that William Johnston was putting up a storeroom and dwelling and that McCormick's store had been completed and would be occupied the next week. The store's second floor was to be fitted up for lectures and concerts. The article also reported that, quote, new families are coming into Venetia every week, and there is a great demand for tenement houses. No discussion of Venetia would be complete without mention of McConaughey's store. The store opened in 1898 and stood for almost a century, closing in 1983. The store was opened by R. Frank McConaughey, who originally came to Venetia as an employee of the Osborne Sager Coal Company. When Frank died in 1936, his son Francis took over operation of the store. It was such an iconic local landmark that area artist Robert Chamberlain, who also designed the Peters Township Arrowhead logo, painted it as part of his series of historic Peters Township landmarks, which also included the township's first purpose-built high school on Bebout Road and McDowell's Barn on Route 19. Chamberlain's painting appears here on the right. The Country Store and Diner now occupies the former location of McConaughey's store on Venetia Road. Bill Bartram's garage was another popular gathering spot for the men of Venetia. Bill operated the service station and general store in Venetia for 35 years. He drove a Peters Township school bus for the same length of time. Shortly before his death in 1947, David Rees, president of the First National Bank in Finleyville and of the Finleyville Planing Mill, donated a plot of ground to be used as a community park and recreation site to the village of Venetia. David was married to Elizabeth Anderson, daughter of Dr. D.M. Anderson, whose daybook we saw earlier. The park was initially administered by the Venetia Athletic Association. The township eventually took over management of the park. At least two organizations are working hard to ensure that the history of Venetia is not forgotten. The Peters Creek Historical Society and the Venetia Heritage Society are both very active in the community. As I already mentioned, the mission of the Peters Creek Historical Society is to preserve local history for future generations to enjoy. The mission of the Venetia Heritage Society is to preserve the former Venetia Grade School through transformative use of the facility as a center for service to people of all ages in the surrounding community and to increase awareness and educate the public about local history and its significance to the area. Thank you for watching. Please join me again on Thursday, December 11th, 2025, when I will be talking about the history of the Peters Township VFW ambulance service.